before the pandemic, obviously the One Fair Wage campaign is working to try and eliminate, whether on a local level, statewide level, and eventually the federal level, the tipped wages. And so allowing to raise the minimum wage and basically eliminate, I mean, at least have that basis. But can you talk about the idea and the myth that, like, oh, people would actually be making less money if there were no tips, right? And if you raise the minimum wage, which has been an excuse that I think even a lot of servers sort of tell themselves is like an excuse for, like, all right, I'm going to keep doing this job because, I'd rather be under the table, than not. And I would be making minimum wage, which is not good, and et cetera.
Yeah. So just to be extremely clear, what we are fighting for is a full livable minimum wage with tips on top. And I just want to share the history because I think it's so important. Look, tipping originated in feudal Europe, where aristocrats and nobles gave tips or bonuses to serfs and vassals, but always on top of a full salary or wage. Imagine that. Serfs and vassals in feudal times got a full salary or wage, and the tips were on top of that. That only changed in the US because the restaurant industry hired Black people at emancipation and didn't want to pay them a wage. And so actually replaced wages with tips. It was the first time tips were mutated from being on top of a wage to becoming the wage itself. So we're not fighting to get rid of tips. We're trying to go back to a time when tips were exactly what they were meant to be, on top of a wage. And there are 7 states that already do this. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska all require a full minimum wage for all workers, and tips have to be on top of that, not instead of that. And these 7 states have higher restaurant industry sales per capita, higher job growth in the industry, higher small business growth rates. They lost fewer businesses during the pandemic. They have higher rates of tipping. So to your point, Francesca, people make a lot more money in these states than they do in the states with a sub-minimum wage because they get a full minimum wage from their boss. Plus, tips are better because guess what? When you pay workers a full minimum wage, they can afford to go out and eat. And we all know restaurant workers tip better when they eat out than other people because they know what it's like. So it helps everybody. But maybe most importantly, you see far less poverty among servers and 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment in these 7 states as you do in the 43 states. Why? Because when you're in California, you get a full minimum wage from your boss. You're not as dependent on the tips. You get tips, but they're a bonus. You don't have to put up with the guy grabbing you because you can swat him away because you can count on a wage from your boss like every other worker in every other industry. And so there's a power dynamic between servers and customers that is greatly reduced when workers can count on a wage from their boss. So what we're fighting for is what's in the Raise the Wage Act, which President Biden actually is 100% behind, which was introduced by Senator Sanders in the Senate and Bobby Scott in the House. It calls for a $15 minimum wage, full elimination of the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers and workers with disabilities. So everybody's would get a full $15 with tips on top of that, which is what workers are demanding in this moment.
Yeah. New York still has, what, $4 an hour for restaurant workers?
It's actually gone up because of us. It's $7 statewide, and in New York City, it's $10, but it's still 66% of the wage. And listen, when you've got
New York, low.
Yeah, exactly. When you've got a majority female workforce, you are essentially telling women you are worth 2/3 of the wage, in New York, which is unacceptable. And in most of the country, these workers are worth more like 1/3 of the wage. So it's a despicable system that allows employers to get away with essentially not paying their workers hardly anything, forcing us as customers to pay their workers' wages for them. And I think this massive shift we're seeing is because, workers have finally reached their endpoint. I know you said a lot of workers in the past thought, I'd rather live on the tips. What workers are saying in this moment, after living through the pandemic, is tips are unreliable. We've come to see tips are completely unreliable. And what you have to put up with to get those tips is ridiculous. So unless we can be guaranteed a wage and the tips are on top of that, this industry just isn't going to work anymore.
Absolutely. And it's seen as such the last thing I'll say is it's seen as such a kind of like, for lack of a better term, like first world industry. Everyone gets to go out and like, go out to eat in restaurants and this and that. And it's like, it's an activity for those who have money, and it runs on so much exploitation, and it can be shut down in a heartbeat with something like a national health emergency, a global pandemic, right?
And or climate change.
Climate change is suddenly gone.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, well, that's, I guess what I'm saying is like, something so prestigious running on so much exploitation is like there's a lot of dissonance there. And so I'm glad. Tell me the name of the act again.
The Raise the Wage Act is moving through Congress, and we need everybody's help to push it. And we also, if you take a look at the report we just put out yesterday, where we've documented 1,600 restaurants around the country that are now paying a full livable wage with tips on top. We need everybody who eats out to go tell your the managers and owners at the restaurants, I want to make sure you're not just paying a full wage now, but you're going to keep paying it. Because I think a lot of these employers think, oh, I'll pay 15 with tips right now, hoping to go back to $2 and $3 next year. They think it's like how I just get people to come back. And we as customers have to say, no. We as customers demand that our tips are on top of the wage, not against workers' wages.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.